The sight was terrifying to the German U-boat crews. For decades, the cover of darkness had been their greatest ally, allowing them to surface safely and recharge their batteries. Then, one night in 1942, blinding artificial daylight suddenly illuminated their vessels from above. British aircraft, now equipped with the revolutionary Leigh Light, could spot surfaced submarines from 3,000 yards away, giving the U-boats virtually no time to dive before bombs rained down. The hunters of the Atlantic had suddenly become the hunted. It was the middle of the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest continuous military campaign of World War II. The German Navy, under the command of Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, had deployed hundreds of submarines with a single mission: starve Britain into submission by cutting off vital supply lines from America. For months, the U-boats had operated with devastating efficiency, sending millions of tons of Allied shipping to the bottom of the ocean. The submarine crews followed a deadly effective pattern. During daylight, they would remain submerged, safe from detection. As darkness fell, they would surface to run their diesel engines, recharge their batteries, and seek out Allied convoys. These nocturnal predators moved freely in the Atlantic night, coordinating their attacks in what the Allied sailors fearfully called wolf packs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Heinrich Meyer stood on the bridge of U-572, breathing in the crisp Atlantic air. After 16 hours submerged in the cramped, foul-smelling confines of the submarine, the night breeze felt like paradise. Around him, other crew members had emerged for a brief taste of fresh air while the diesel engines below roared, pumping precious electricity into the vessel's batteries. 2 more hours and we'll be fully charged, his first officer reported. Radar shows no contacts within 20 miles. Meyer nodded with satisfaction. His submarine had sunk 3 merchant vessels in the past week alone. At 32, he was already decorated with the Knight's Cross, having sent over 50,000 tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. The British had no answer to Germany's undersea dominance after dark. What Captain Meyer didn't know was that in a research facility near Portsmouth, England, a team of British scientists and engineers had been working feverishly on a solution. Leading them was Commander John Phillips, a former destroyer captain who had lost his previous ship to a U-boat attack. "The problem is simple," Phillips had told his team months earlier. "We can detect submarines with our airborne radar, but by the time our aircraft reach the location, the U-boats have spotted our approach and submerged. We need to catch them with their pants down." The solution they developed was ingeniously straightforward. Aircraft would approach with their radar active but all external lights off. Upon detecting a surfaced submarine, the pilot would maneuver into attack position. Only at the final moment would they switch on a powerful new searchlight mounted under the aircraft's wing or nose. The Leigh Light, named after its inventor, squadron leader Humphrey de Vere Leigh. By early 1942, the first Wellington bombers equipped with the Leigh Light were ready for operational use. Their mission was to turn the night-long an ally of the U-boats against them. Flying Officer William Bennett piloted one of the first Leigh Light-equipped Wellingtons. A former commercial pilot from Yorkshire, Bennett had joined the Royal Air Force after his younger brother's merchant ship was torpedoed in 1941. Tonight, his aircraft patrolled the Bay of Biscay, a prime hunting ground where U-boats often transited between their French bases and the open Atlantic. Contact bearing 045, range 3,000 yards, his radar operator called out. Surface vessel, moving slowly, probable U-boat. Bennett's heart raced as he banked the Wellington toward the contact. The aircraft remained completely dark as they closed the distance, flying at just 800 feet above the wave tops. Range 2,000 yards, the radar operator continued. He hasn't submerged, doesn't know we're here. At 1,500 yards, Bennett gave the order. Stand by Leigh Light. Now. The powerful 22-million candle power beam burst from beneath the aircraft's wing, creating a perfect circle of daylight on the ocean's surface. Caught in this sudden illumination was the long, dark shape of a Type 70C U-boat, its deck guns manned, diesel hatches open, crew members visible on the conning tower all frozen in shock at the sudden exposure. Back on U-572, Captain Meyer's peaceful moment was shattered by a frantic shout from the watch officer. "Aircraft! Aircraft!" Before Meyer could process the warning, blinding light bathed his submarine. Looking up, he saw the dark shape of a bomber silhouetted against the night sky, already beginning its attack run. "Dive! Dive!" he ordered, lunging for the hatch. The klaxon wailed as sailors scrambled below decks, but diving a U-boat wasn't instantaneous. It took nearly a minute to close all hatches, switch to electric motors, flood the ballast tanks, and slip beneath the waves. With the aircraft already upon them, Meyer knew they might not have even 30 seconds. Officer Bennett's bombardier had the surfaced U-boat perfectly framed in his sight. Target confirmed, releasing depth charges. 4 cylindrical bombs dropped from the Wellington, splashing into the water around the frantically diving submarine. Seconds later, the ocean erupted as the charges detonated at their preset depth. The concussive force hit U-572 like a giant's hammer. Gauges shattered, men were thrown from their stations, and seawater began spraying through ruptured seals. Captain Meyer, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, struggled to maintain control as the submarine went into an uncontrolled dive. "Blow all tanks," he ordered. "Emergency surface." The damaged U-boat broke the surface again, but the Wellington was already circling back for another attack run. The Leigh Light found them instantly, the brilliant beam fixing them in place like an insect pinned to display. "We can't dive again," the chief engineer reported grimly. Hull integrity compromised in sections 3 and 4. Meyer made the only decision he could to save his crew. "Abandon ship," he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. As the crew of U-572 scrambled into life rafts, similar scenes were playing out across the Atlantic. That same night, 3 other U-boats were caught and destroyed by Leigh Light-equipped aircraft. Within weeks, the casualty reports reaching Grand Admiral Dönitz's headquarters painted a disturbing picture. The night was no longer safe. In a fortified bunker in Lorient, France, Admiral Dönitz studied the growing list of lost submarines with growing concern. "How many now?" he asked his intelligence officer. 17 U-boats lost to aircraft attacks in the past month, Herr Admiral, mostly during night surface operations. Dönitz paced the room, his face grim. "They found a way to see in the dark. This changes everything." The Admiral knew the strategic implications were profound. U-boats relied on surface running at night to recharge batteries and make good speed toward hunting grounds. If they could no longer surface safely after dark, their operational range and effectiveness would be severely curtailed. "We must adapt," he declared to his staff. "Effective immediately, all U-boats will be ordered to surface only briefly, and only in the most remote areas. Engineering will accelerate development of the snorkel device to allow underwater battery charging." But these adaptations would take time to implement, and they came with significant drawbacks. The snorkel, a breathing tube that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while just below the surface, was still experimental and reduced both speed and situational awareness. Meanwhile, the Allied air forces expanded their Leigh Light operations. By mid-1942, both British and American aircraft were equipped with the device, patrolling in ever-widening arcs from bases in England, Iceland, and North Africa. For the U-boat crews, the psychological impact was as devastating as the physical threat. The sanctuary of darkness had been stripped away. Every moment on the surface became a nerve-wracking ordeal, with all eyes scanning the sky for the telltale flash that meant death was seconds away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the British side, the Leigh Light's success brought long-awaited hope. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had once described the U-boat threat as the only thing that truly frightened him during the war, received the operational reports with immense satisfaction. "For the first time," he told the War Cabinet, "we have found an answer to the night raiders. The tide is turning in the Battle of the Atlantic." Air Marshal Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, pushed for even greater resources to be allocated to anti-submarine warfare. Every U-boat we sink is worth a dozen bombing raids over Germany, he argued. They can't fight without fuel and materials, which only reach them by sea. As Allied aircraft production ramped up, more and more patrol planes were fitted with both improved radar and Leigh lights. The hunting pattern became systematic. Radar to detect, light to illuminate, depth charges to destroy. By late 1942, specially trained crews were devastating the U-boat fleet. Lieutenant James Cooper piloted a B-24 Liberator with the U.S. Navy's VB-103 Squadron, operating from bases in Newfoundland. On a moonless night in October 1942, his crew detected a group of 3 U-boats traveling together on the surface, likely heading to intercept an upcoming convoy. "Multiple contacts, sir," his radar operator reported. 3 distinct signatures, in formation, 12 miles ahead. Cooper ordered radio silence and moved his aircraft into position. At exactly the right moment, the Leigh Light blazed on, revealing not 1 but 3 submarines sailing in a tight triangle formation. "My God," Cooper whispered, "it's like shooting fish in a barrel." The lead U-boat immediately began to dive, but the other 2 seemed momentarily paralyzed by the sudden illumination. Cooper's bombardier released their depth charges precisely, straddling the first submarine as it slipped beneath the waves. The massive underwater explosions threw geysers of water hundreds of feet into the air. As Cooper brought the Liberator around for a second attack run, he saw that one of the remaining U-boats was already listing badly, its conning tower damaged by the nearby explosions. The third was desperately trying to dive, but not before Cooper's gunners raked its deck with machine gun fire, clearing away the anti-aircraft crew who had belatedly begun to return fire. A second pattern of depth charges finished the job. When Cooper circled back 15 minutes later, only floating debris and an oil slick marked where 3 submarines had been. 43 German sailors were killed that night, while 37 were pulled from the frigid Atlantic waters by Allied ships the following day. For the German Navy, losses like these were unsustainable. Each U-boat required months to construct and experienced crews who couldn't be easily replaced. Admiral Dönitz found himself facing a terrible mathematical reality. If current loss rates continued, Germany would run out of submarines before Britain ran out of ships. In Berlin, the Naval High Command began receiving increasingly desperate messages from U-boat commanders. Captain Kurt Reichmann of U-134 transmitted one such report after narrowly escaping a Leigh Light attack off the coast of Portugal. Surfaced at 2,300 hours to recharge batteries. At approximately 2,330, aircraft approached without warning, detected only when searchlight activated at close range. Crash dived, but depth charges damaged rudder control. Unable to maintain operational depth, request emergency maintenance upon arrival Brest. Crew morale severely affected, men afraid to surface even when critically low on battery power. Such reports multiplied as 1942 gave way to 1,943. What had begun as a trickle of losses became a flood. May 1943, later known as Black May in the German Navy, saw 41 U-boats destroyed in a single month, many of them victims of aircraft equipped with the Leigh Light. Admiral Dönitz finally faced the inevitable. On the 24th of May 1943, he sent the coded message that U-boat commanders had dreaded. All vessels withdraw from North Atlantic operations. Return to bases or proceed to operational areas south of Azores. Wolfpack tactics suspended until further notice. It was an admission of defeat in the central theatre of the undersea war. The Battle of the Atlantic would continue for 2 more years, but never again would German submarines pose an existential threat to Allied shipping. The Leigh Light, combined with improved radar, better escort vessels, and the breaking of German naval codes, had turned the tide. For men like Captain Meyer, one of the few survivors of U-572, the war continued in different submarines and different oceans. But something fundamental had changed. The psychological edge, the ability to strike with impunity from the darkness, was gone forever. In a prisoner of war camp in Canada, Meyer later reflected on that fateful night when light had burst from the sky above his submarine. In that moment, he told a fellow captured officer. "I knew the war had changed. When they took the night away from us, they took away our greatest weapon." The Leigh Light's impact extended far beyond the technical or tactical. It represented something more profound, the power of human ingenuity to find solutions even in the darkest moments of conflict. A relatively simple innovation combining existing radar technology with a powerful searchlight had helped turn the tide in the longest battle of World War II. As the war progressed, the Leigh Light's influence continued to grow. By early 1943, Allied aircraft manufacturers had standardized the installation, reducing the light's weight and improving its reliability. What had begun as a British innovation quickly spread to American and Canadian aircraft as well, creating a unified approach to nighttime anti-submarine warfare. Commander John Phillips, watching from his office in the Admiralty, took quiet pride in how his team's creation had transformed the battle. "We didn't just give them a light," he told a colleague. "We gave them hope when the shipping losses were at their worst." The human cost of the U-boat war became increasingly apparent as more German submarines fell victim to Leigh Light-equipped aircraft. Each sunken U-boat represented not just a tactical victory, but the lives of 40 to 60 young men. The average age of a German submarine crewman was just 24, and many were younger still. In what became known as Happy Valley, a stretch of the mid-Atlantic beyond the range of land-based aircraft U-boats had once operated with relative impunity. Now, with the introduction of very long-range bombers equipped with the Leigh Light, even this sanctuary was compromised. For the Allied air crews, night operations against submarines carried their own dangers. Flying at low altitude over the pitch-black ocean, often in poor weather, required extraordinary skill and concentration. A momentary lapse could send an aircraft crashing into the waves. Many crews were lost not to enemy fire, but to the unforgiving sea itself. Flight Lieutenant David Harrison knew these risks intimately. His Sunderland flying boat, patrolling 400 miles west of Ireland, had already been airborne for 7 hours when his radar operator detected a surface contact. "Looks like 2 vessels, sir," the operator reported, travelling close together at 12 knots, range 7 miles. Harrison brought the massive flying boat around, dropping to just 600 feet above the swelling ocean. The night was cloudy, with no moon-perfect conditions for U-boats, and challenging for aircraft. "Ready the Leigh Light on my mark," Harrison ordered as they closed to 3,000 yards. 3, 2, 1, illuminate. The powerful beam cut through the darkness, revealing not the expected U-boats, but a small Portuguese fishing trawler. Alongside it, painted in German naval grey but flying a false Portuguese flag, was a supply vessel, one of the secret network of tankers that refueled U-boats far from shore. "Supply ship," Harrison called out. "All guns prepare to fire." The disguised German vessel reacted instantly, its hidden anti-aircraft guns opening fire on the approaching aircraft. Tracers streaked upward, several rounds punching through the Sunderland's hull. Harrison held course as his gunners returned fire, the exchange intensifying as they closed the distance. A lucky shot from the Sunderland's forward gun position struck the supply ship's fuel containers. A brilliant flash erupted as aviation fuel ignited, turning the vessel into a floating inferno within seconds. The nearby fishing boat, apparently pressed into service as a lookout, frantically tried to distance itself from the burning ship. Harrison circled once, confirming the destruction of the supply vessel, then set course for home, his aircraft leaking fuel from bullet holes in the wing tanks. They barely made it back to their base in Northern Ireland, landing on fumes as dawn broke. The destruction of Germany's at-sea supply network became another crucial aspect of the anti-U-boat campaign. Without these secret rendezvous points, submarines were forced to return to port more frequently, reducing their time on patrol and exposing them to additional dangers near heavily defended coastlines. Admiral Dönitz, facing mounting losses, ordered a fundamental redesign of U-boat tactics. "We can no longer operate as we have," he told his staff. "The surface is death now, day or night." The German response was twofold. Accelerate the development of new technologies that would allow submarines to spend more time underwater, and shift operations to areas where Allied air coverage was thinner. One of these innovations was the snorkel, a breathing tube that allowed submarines to run their diesel engines while just below the surface. Though it existed in prototype form earlier, the urgent need created by the Leigh Light pushed its development and deployment forward. Captain Werner Schmidt of U-211 was among the first commanders to receive the new device. "It's ungainly and reduces our speed," he wrote in his war diary, "but at least we can recharge without surfacing fully. The men call it salvation." Even with the snorkel, limitations remained. U-boats still had to operate close to the surface, making them potentially detectable by radar. The tube itself created a radar return and a visible wake in anything but the calmest seas. Worse, it severely restricted visibility. Submarine commanders could no longer scan the horizon for targets or threats while recharging. For the men inside the submarines, conditions deteriorated further. The snorkel systems were primitive, and carbon monoxide poisoning became a serious danger. Crews suffered headaches, nausea, and in some cases, permanent brain damage from operating in poorly ventilated compartments, while diesel engines gulped air through the restricted intake. In the shipyards of Bremen and Kiel, German engineers worked frantically on more revolutionary designs, submarines that could operate underwater for days or weeks without surfacing. The Type XXI and XXII Electroboot submarines featured larger batteries, streamlined hulls, and snorkels as standard equipment. But these advanced vessels came too late to change the course of the war. Meanwhile, the Allies continued to refine their hunting techniques. By mid-1943, special Leigh Light squadrons operated from bases across the Atlantic periphery, from Iceland to the Azores, from Newfoundland to West Africa. Their coordination improved as well, with submarines detected by one aircraft often being tracked continuously by a succession of planes until a kill could be confirmed. The human drama played out night after night across the vast Atlantic battleground. U-boat crews, already suffering from the stress of long patrols in cramped conditions, now faced the additional psychological burden of knowing that surfacing, even briefly, could bring instant death from above. Lieutenant Karl Müller, serving aboard U-306 Inches, the North Atlantic, described the crew's state of mind in a letter found after the submarine's eventual destruction. "No one sleeps properly anymore. Even below the surface, men start at every unusual sound, convinced it's an aircraft approaching. The captain hasn't left the control room in 3 days. We surface only for minutes at a time, just enough to grab a breath of air through the hatch before diving again. This is no way to fight a war." The physical toll matched the psychological one. Extended periods underwater led to outbreaks of fungal infections, respiratory problems, and vitamin D deficiencies among U-boat crews. The need to conserve battery power meant colder temperatures inside the hull and reduced use of cooking equipment. Men subsisted on cold rations and lost weight steadily throughout their patrols. For Allied air crews, the battle brought its own hardships. Flying 8 to 14-hour missions over featureless ocean, often in terrible weather, pushed pilots and navigators to their limits. Radio operator Thomas Jenkins, serving with an RAF squadron in Iceland, recorded his experiences in a diary. "Another 11-hour flight last night. Temperature in the aircraft dropped to -15. Anderson's oxygen mask froze to his face, had to pry it off with warm water when we landed." 2 U-boat sightings, 1 confirmed kill. "Felt nothing when we saw the men in the water. Too cold, too tired to feel anything anymore. That makes 3 this month for our crew. They're giving us 3 days rest, then back out again." The combination of improved radar, the Leigh Light, and better depth charges created a deadly triangle that U-boats struggled to escape. By late 1943, a surfaced submarine had less than a 50% chance of surviving if detected by Allied aircraft, compared to over 90% in 1941. Captain Hans Dietrich of U-405 was one of many who experienced this lethal efficiency firsthand. On patrol northeast of the Azores in September 1943, his submarine surfaced at midnight to recharge batteries that had reached critically low levels after 36 hours submerged. "Clear skies, excellent visibility," the watch officer reported as the conning tower broke the surface. "No vessels or aircraft in sight. Dietrich ordered the diesel engines started, and the main hatch opened to vent the stale air that had accumulated during their extended submersion. As the fresh ocean breeze swept through the compartments, men took turns coming up for brief moments on the bridge, breathing deeply and gazing at the star-filled sky. Exactly 17 minutes after surfacing, the Leigh Light from a patrolling B-24 Liberator caught U-405 inches its unforgiving glare. The aircraft had approached with radar active but all external lights off, following the now standard hunting procedure. "Dive," Dietrich ordered, but he knew it was too late. The four-engined bomber was already beginning its attack run, and the submarine's deck gun crew hadn't even made it to their stations. The first pattern of depth charges straddled the diving U-boat perfectly. The concussive force ruptured seams in the pressure hull, sending jets of cold Atlantic water streaming into the control room. As the submarine began an uncontrolled descent, Dietrich gave the only order that might save some of his crew. "All hands, abandon ship, surface, and abandon ship." Emergency air was blown into the ballast tanks, bringing the stricken vessel back to the surface one final time. Men scrambled through hatches, many without life vests or proper clothing. The Liberator circled overhead, its Leigh Light keeping the chaotic scene illuminated as the submarine began to slip beneath the waves again. Of U-405's crew of 52, only 13 survived to be picked up by a British destroyer the following morning. Dietrich was not among them. According to survivors, he had remained at his post in the control room, ensuring as many of his men as possible could escape before the ocean claimed him and his vessel. Similar scenes played out with increasing frequency across the Atlantic theatre. The statistics told the grim story. From June 1943 to May 1944, more than 120 U-boats were destroyed by aircraft, the majority during night operations where the Leigh Light had proven decisive. Admiral Dönitz, now effectively overseeing a defensive campaign, wrote to Hitler's headquarters, "The U-boat arm is no longer able to conduct offensive operations in the North Atlantic with the current technology. We are losing submarines faster than they can be built, and trained crews faster than they can be replaced." The strategic impact was immense. As U-boats withdrew from the main convoy routes, Allied shipping losses plummeted. In 1942, German submarines had sunk over 2 million tons of Allied shipping. By 1944, that figure had dropped to less than 1 million tons, despite an enormous increase in the total number of vessels crossing the Atlantic. For Britain, which had faced genuine starvation as ships carrying food and supplies were torpedoed in unprecedented numbers, the defeat of the U-boat threat meant survival. Churchill later wrote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. If the Leigh Light and other developments had not turned the tide when they did, I do not know how we could have continued." The human stories behind these statistics revealed both tragedy and heroism. On both sides, men fought with courage against not just each other, but against the Atlantic itself, a merciless environment that claimed many even after their vessels were destroyed. Lieutenant Commander Michael Thornton, a destroyer captain who participated in numerous U-boat hunts, described recovering German survivors after a Leigh Light aircraft had sunk their submarine. They came aboard shivering, some badly burned or wounded. One young man couldn't have been more than 17. He kept asking about his captain in broken English. When we told him only 12 had survived, he broke down. These weren't monsters, just exhausted young men following orders, same as ours. For the developers of the Leigh Light, the moral calculations were complex. Squadron leader Humphrey de Verley, visiting an operational base in late 1943, watched as aircraft equipped with his invention took off for night patrols. An officer asked how it felt to have created something that had changed the course of the war. "I've saved thousands of Allied lives," Lee replied after a long pause. "But I've also sent a lot of young Germans to the bottom. I try not to dwell on that part." As the war progressed into 1944, the Leigh Light's effectiveness actually increased, despite German countermeasures. Improved versions provided broader, more consistent illumination, while better coordination between radar operators and pilots reduced the warning time for submarines to virtually zero. the technique evolved as well. Aircraft would sometimes approach with lights off, drop parachute flares near a suspected submarine position, then catch the U-boat in the Leigh Light as it attempted to escape the general illumination. Other tactics included coordinated attacks by multiple aircraft, with one illuminating while others attacked from different angles. By D-Day in June 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won. U-boats attempting to attack the massive invasion fleet found themselves hunted relentlessly by aircraft operating from carriers and shore bases. Of the 22 submarines sent against the Normandy landings, 8 were destroyed and most others were forced to withdraw without achieving any significant success. The technology race continued nonetheless. German engineers developed radar warning receivers that could detect approaching aircraft, giving submarines precious additional seconds to dive. They experimented with rubber coatings and other materials to reduce radar signatures. But these measures provided only marginal improvements against the overwhelming air superiority the Allies now enjoyed. For the remaining U-boat crews, the final year of the war became an exercise in survival rather than offensive operations. Captain Gerhard Weber, commanding U-853 inches the Western Atlantic, captured this shift in his final patrol report. "We sight more aircraft than ships now. Surface time reduced to absolute minimum, just enough to draw breath through the snorkel. 3 men suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning after diesel fumes backed up through faulty valves. Attacked convoy off Halifax but forced to withdraw after destroyer detected us. The men performed admirably despite knowing our chances of returning to port grow slimmer with each patrol. We fight on because that is our duty, not because victory remains possible." Weber and his entire crew would perish just 2 days before Germany's surrender, one of the last U-boats, or destroyed in the European theatre. As Allied forces pushed into Germany itself in early 1945, the submarine bases along the French and Norwegian coasts fell one by one. The massive concrete pens that had sheltered U-boats from air attack became tombs for vessels that could no longer safely venture to sea. The final Allied assessment of the Leigh Light's contribution to victory was unequivocal. Air Marshal Sir John Slessor, who had overseen much of the anti-submarine campaign, wrote, "The marriage of airborne radar and the Leigh Light transformed the situation. Before their introduction, a U-boat caught on the surface at night had a better than 90% chance of escaping. After, its chances fell to less than 20%. No other technical development so dramatically reversed the fortunes of war in the Atlantic." For the men who had served on both sides of this technological battle, the memories remained vivid decades later. Former Leigh Light pilot William Bennett, speaking at a veterans' reunion in 1975, reflected on those dark nights over the Atlantic. "We knew what we were doing was saving lives, thousands of merchant seamen, and the populations of Britain who depended on those convoys. But I never celebrated a kill. Those were men down there, just like us, doing their duty." Former U-boat radioman Hans Schultz, one of the few survivors of U-572, offered his perspective at the same event. "When that light hit us, it was like God himself had reached down to judge us. In that moment, you knew you had been found, and probably would not survive. Yet, strangely, I feel no bitterness now. We were all pawns in a terrible game." The legacy of the Leigh Light extended far beyond World War II. Its basic principle, using radar to detect targets and then illuminating them for visual attack, became standard in naval and air operations worldwide. More importantly, it demonstrated how a relatively simple innovation, applied at the right moment, could dramatically alter the course of a major military campaign. After the war, Squadron Leader Leigh received modest recognition for his invention, including the Air Force Cross. The true scale of his contribution became clear only decades later, as historians analyzed the factors that had turned the tide in the Atlantic. By some estimates, the Leigh Light had been directly responsible for the destruction of over 70 U-boats and had forced fundamental changes in German naval tactics that neutralized hundreds more. For the submariners who had once ruled the night, the Leigh Light represented a watershed moment when technology had stripped away their greatest advantage. The psychological impact was as important as the physical threat. The constant fear of sudden illumination, The knowledge that darkness no longer provided safety wore down crews already operating under extreme stress. Captain Heinrich Meyer, one of the war's early U-boat aces who survived the sinking of U-572, wrote in his memoirs, "Before the Leigh Light, we felt invincible at night. After it, we felt naked, exposed, hunted." That shift in perspective from predator to prey was perhaps the true turning point of the undersea war. The Battle of the Atlantic ultimately claimed over 30,000 Allied merchant seamen, 6,000 Royal Navy personnel, and 28,000 German U-boat crewmen, the highest casualty rate of any German service branch in World War II. Approximately 75% of all U-boat sailors never returned from patrol. Yet, amid this carnage, individual acts of humanity stood out. There were numerous instances of Allied vessels rescuing German submariners, and even cases of U-boats surfacing to aid survivors from torpedoed ships. These moments of compassion amid total war reminded all involved that beneath the uniforms and opposing flags, the same human spirit endured. In the final analysis, the Leigh Light's significance went beyond its tactical impact. It embodied the innovative spirit that ultimately gave the Allies their edge in the war, the ability to identify critical problems, develop practical solutions, and implement them quickly across multinational forces. Commander John Phillips, who had championed the Light's development from the beginning, perhaps summarized its legacy best in a 1946 interview. "We didn't outbuild the Germans in the Atlantic, though production certainly mattered. We didn't necessarily outfight them, as their submariners were skilled and brave. What we did was outthink them at a critical moment, finding a way to neutralize their greatest advantage." The Leigh Light wasn't just a searchlight, it was a symbol of how innovation can change destiny. Today, the Battle of the Atlantic is remembered as the longest continuous military campaign of World War II, one where control of shipping lanes, rather than territory, determined the outcome. The Leigh Light, which transformed night into day at the crucial moment of attack, stands as one of the decisive technological innovations that helped secure Allied victory. For the sailors and airmen who fought in that vast, grey battleground, far from land and often from any hope of rescue, the war was reduced to its most elemental form, a struggle for survival against both human enemies and the unforgiving sea. The Leigh Light changed the equation in that struggle, tilting the balance away from the hunters of the deep and toward the hunters of the sky. In the decades that followed, submarine technology evolved to make vessels truly underwater weapons, capable of remaining submerged for months at a time. The cat-and-mouse game between submarines and aircraft continued, with new sensors, weapons, and countermeasures constantly shifting the advantage. But the fundamental lesson of the Leigh Light remained. In warfare, as in life, sometimes the simplest solutions prove the most profound. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.